My name is Becky Gottsegen, and I work in clay. And I took on a project several years ago to do some portraits of men who'd been exonerated by the Innocence Project, New Orleans. This exhibition is called Exonerated: Portraits of the Wrongfully Convicted. I was originally approached just to do one portrait of one of the exoneratees, Jerome Morgan, who is on their board. I believe he's still on their board. But the office of the Innocence Project sent me photos of him, and they were old photos when his hair was short and he was very conservative with a bow tie. And then when I met him, he had braids. I kind of was embarrassed and said, I would love to take photos of you as you look now. So I took photos, and it was probably a year later when I was ready to sculpt him again, and I had to call him and say, do you still have braids? I could just see me sculpting him with braids, and he had cut his hair short again. But I did Jerome, and then I did a man named Jarvis Ballard, who lives in Violet, and when I did the second one, I said, I really have to meet him. I can't just be sent pictures because it didn't work out so well. So I ended up meeting Jarvis at his girlfriend's business in Violet, Louisiana, and took a bunch of pictures and sculpted his portrait with a second. And about 6 months later, I got an invitation to the Innocence Project's gala, and the newest exoneree was a man named Sullivan Walter. And I called my friend Frank Nooner, who was the president of the board, who got me into this to begin with, and said, I'd be happy to do another portrait of Sullivan. So he was thrilled because I kept saying, y'all don't have to pay me to do this. I'm enjoying doing it. And when my husband and I went to the gala, lots of the exonerees come in for it, and they all had a little flower on their shirt. And I went around with my iPhone and went up to each of them and said, I'm a very unofficial photographer for the Innocence Project, but I'm a sculptor, and I've done 3 sculptures, portraits of 3 of the exonerees, and I'd love to take your pictures so I could do yours. So I got 15 of them. So 15 of the exonerees who were there. I think there were maybe 3 that I missed. So I took photos of them, kind of stand in front of someone, and I just walk around them so that they don't have to move or do anything. And I started working on them, and I'm pretty fast sculpting. The thing that took the longest was connecting with the additional men who were not at the gala. And in this program that I did for the exhibition, I have the images of each of the men from when I took before I sculpted them, and on the back of the program are the pictures of them as they were sculpted. And inside each of the pages, there's a picture of the real man, a picture of the bust, and then one of their stories that I took from the Innocence Project's website and sent to them so they could make any corrections. And here we are. The local newspaper came and did a story about it. And the picture they used in the newspaper is of Earl Truvia, one of the exonerees, and he was standing next to his portrait. And he was so excited to see his picture in the paper. So their comments there were 12 of the men who came to Baton Rouge for the opening reception, and they're all just so happy that their cases aren't forgotten. They feel like by having this exhibition, we had it last year, we had it again this year, that they'll be remembered and people will hear their stories, and hopefully, ultimately, we'll have some changes made in the criminal court system in Louisiana, because it's one of the worst. And with our new Republican governor, they had a special session of the legislature last summer and changed a lot of the laws so that it's going to be almost impossible for the Innocence Project in New Orleans to free people, because they have a very short time frame to find additional information to get them out. So here we are. I guess I knew nothing about the Innocence Project. I knew of the Innocence Project and Barry Scheck. I knew about the original Innocence Project in New York. I had no idea that I believe now, the most recent thing I read is there's 64 around the country of individual ones. And the Innocence Project in New York, because it's had so much press and good publicity, and they have amazing marketing and great social media presence, they raise a lot of money. And unfortunately, the Innocence Project in New Orleans struggles, and I think they need help. They need financial help, and I have a couple of ideas about how I'm going to try to help them do that. So I learned that somehow these men, Wilbur Jones spent almost 46 years in prison, Elvis Brooks over 40 years, and somehow they can smile and enjoy life. Their lives have been difficult. Some have had much more difficulty in survival than others, and it just, my heart breaks for what they've been through and how little the general population knows about these injustices. So I guess it makes me really, really want to help them any way I can. And the men, because it's not just the Innocence Project. It's like once they free people, they help them get a driver's license, they help them find a birth certificate, they try to help them find housing and jobs, but it's difficult. One of the exonerees, I sent an article that was in 225, and I texted it to I have contact with 16 of them who I know pretty well. And one of them wrote me back and said, well, along with the good comes the bad. And the bad was he lost his job last Friday. And he was doing construction work, and their work had slowed down, and they laid him off. So I have a friend, my husband has a close friend who has a close friend who has an employment agency in New Orleans, and I called him. He said his wife did the staffing. I talked to her on the phone for 20 minutes, and she said, I can put him to work immediately. It was Jarvis Ballard. And she said, I work with a man. He's got a big heart. He will love this project, because her company works with an organization called, I think it's called 72. And it's about the first 72 hours that someone gets out of prison. And these are people who committed crimes. They're not people who've been exonerated. And so she works with several organizations helping people who, when they're paroled or they get out of prison. So she said, I know this man, he has 3 companies, under one umbrella, and she said he will be all over this. So I need to make sure that they're the right people at the Innocence Project New Orleans for her to deal with in helping other men get better jobs. Because I know one of the men is like a busboy at a restaurant in the French Quarter, which we know is not the best way to survive. So what gives me hope? I guess going to the state capitol on Saturday, yesterday, and seeing people rising up and saying we can't live like this anymore. I think it's scary. It's a really scary time in our lives. With Elon Musk going through companies, I have friends who, a very close friend whose daughter worked for the General Services Administration, I think what it's called, and she said it's just crazy. Like they're monitoring their computers and making sure they're not sending out any emails and not passing on bad information. And I haven't talked to her in a couple of weeks, and I feel quite certain she has no job. And one of the things we talked about was my husband and I did a cruise that started in Budapest. And in Budapest, there are these bronze shoes that were related to the Holocaust. And it's like something that everybody goes to see along the riverbank. And I said, I feel like that would be such an amazing project, is to do shoes around all these buildings in the federal government where people have just been tossed aside, where he's come in with what does he say, not a hacksaw, electric saw or something. I'm trying to have hope, and we went to the New Orleans Book Festival last weekend, and Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote a wonderful book that I'm listening to. I'm about halfway through, about her husband, Dick Goodwin, who worked for Kennedy and then worked for Johnson. And listening to the book, she talks about how Kennedy started the Peace Corps. And it was talking to a bunch of students in the University of Michigan, and he said, are you willing to give up a couple years of your life to help your country, to learn more about other countries? And they were all fired up about it. And so when we look back at that period of time where there was someone who gave a shit, who wanted to help underprivileged people, wanted to help Black people, wanted the civil rights to pass, and here we are now. It's like everything that has happened is being taken away. It's pretty scary, but I'm trying to be hopeful.